Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
The champagne flute felt unnaturally cold in my hand, a sliver of ice against skin that was already numb. The party was a kaleidoscope of forced cheer, the tinsel, the generic holiday music, the shrill laughter of people who spent 50 weeks a year tolerating each other. It was the annual holiday gala for Clara's firm, an event I'd always attended with a quiet sense of pride. Tonight, that pride had curdled into something sour and heavy in my gut. It had been building for months, a slow accumulation of wrong details. A puzzle I refused to solve. The way Clara would angle her phone away from me, the hushed phone calls that ended the moment I walked into the room. "It's just the office group chat, Eli," she'd say, her smile a little too bright. The late nights attributed to project deadlines, the weekend trips for team-building seminars. I had accepted it all because I loved her, because the alternative was unthinkable, because admitting the truth meant admitting that the life I had so carefully constructed was a house of cards in a hurricane. Tonight, she was radiant. She wore a deep emerald dress that clung to her silhouette, her auburn hair swept up in an elegant chignon. She was the center of every conversation, her laughter, a light, musical thing that always drew people in. I watched her from across the room, my wife, the woman I was so proud of, and I saw how they all admired her. But my eyes kept being drawn to one man, Damien Croft. Until tonight, he was just a name she mentioned occasionally, a senior colleague. But now, seeing them in the same space, the puzzle pieces began to click into place with a horrifying certainty. The lingering glances that lasted a second too long, the way his hand brushed her back as he passed. Small things, insignificant to anyone else, but to me, they were thunderclaps. I had come here tonight feeling optimistic, almost foolishly so. I was on the cusp of a promotion I'd been chasing for 2 years. It was the final piece we needed. With a salary increase, Clara could finally leave her high-pressure job, the one she claimed to hate. We could focus on us, on starting the family we'd always talked about. I could finally give her the life she deserved, a life of peace and security. Everything was falling into place. I could see the future so clearly. Then came the manager's speech, a blur of corporate platitudes and forced applause. As the clapping died down, I saw it. The moment that would incinerate my world. Damien leaned in close to Clara, his lips brushing her ear. He whispered something. She laughed. It wasn't a polite, social laugh. It was intimate, conspiratorial, a shared secret between two people who existed in a world that did not include me. My breath caught in my chest. As if sensing my gaze, Damien looked up, his eyes locking with mine from across the crowded room. He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. Instead, a slow, crooked smile spread across his face. It was a masterpiece of contempt. It was sharp, ironic, and utterly confident. That smile held no apology. It held a challenge. It was a silent, brutal confession. It said, "Yes, I have what is yours. And what are you going to do about it?" In that single, devastating moment, I knew. I didn't need to see the messages. I didn't need to hear a confession. That smile was the signature on a contract I had never agreed to, a pact between two men where only one knew the terms. Everything turned to ash. The champagne in my glass, the future I'd envisioned, the love I held for the woman laughing by his side. It was all gone, burned away by the heat of a single, contemptuous smile. I didn't react. I couldn't. My body was frozen, but my mind was screaming. I lowered my gaze, took a sip of the champagne, and let the cold bubbles burn a path down my throat. To the outside world, I was Elias Vance, a supportive husband enjoying a party. Inside, the ground had opened up beneath me, and I was in a freefall. The drive home was a study in silence. A thick, suffocating blanket of unspoken words filled the car. Clara, either oblivious or a phenomenal actress, chattered excitedly about the party, about a new boss who seemed to favor her, about the lighter atmosphere at the office since a management change. Her voice was just noise, a meaningless frequency buzzing in my ears. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Each word she spoke a small, sharp stab into a wound that was already gaping. Lying in bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, the familiar shadows of our bedroom now looking alien and menacing. I felt trapped. I thought of all the stories I'd heard, friends who had gone through quiet betrayals. "There's always a sign," they'd said. There always was. But love has this cruel habit of making you blind, of encouraging you to explain away the inconsistencies until one day, a single smile destroys everything. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, before the sun had even thought about rising. I moved through our morning routine with the quiet precision of a ghost. I made coffee, its bitter aroma filling a kitchen that no longer felt like mine. I read the newspaper, the words blurring into meaningless shapes on the page. I left for work at the usual time, placing a kiss on her sleeping head, a gesture so automated it felt like a betrayal to myself. But on the inside, a fundamental shift had occurred. I was no longer the man I had been 24 hours ago. The loving, trusting husband was gone. In his place was someone colder, more methodical. A man in search not of reconciliation, but of certainty. What had started with a smile would end with something stronger, dignity. At my desk, surrounded by the hum of the workday, my mind was a whirlwind of cold logic. Emotion was a luxury I could no longer afford. Intuition had brought me to the precipice. Now, I needed facts. Undeniable proof. Not for her, but for me. I needed to regain control of the narrative of my own life. During my lunch break, I walked to a quiet corner of a nearby park. I pulled out my phone and made a call I never thought I'd have to make. Garrett, my best friend since college, answered on the second ring. I kept my voice low, steady. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. I just said I needed a discreet referral for a sensitive business matter. He didn't press for details. He was that kind of friend. He understood the weight in my voice. An hour later, he texted me a name and a number. Pierce. Quiet. Effective. The best. I stared at the name for a long time. Making this call was crossing a line. It was admitting that my marriage wasn't just in trouble. It was a wreckage I needed to professionally survey. With a deep breath, I dialed. A calm, gravelly voice answered. Pierce. My name is Elias Vance. I was referred by Garrett, I said, my voice sounding distant, as if it belonged to someone else. We met that afternoon in a nondescript coffee shop far from my neighborhood or office. Pierce was a man who blended into the background. He was of average height and build, dressed in simple, forgettable clothes, but his eyes missed nothing. They were sharp, analytical, and held no judgment. I got straight to the point. There was no room for emotion here. This was a transaction. I laid out everything I had. Damien Croft's full name, his address, his workplace, the model of his car. I even remembered the expensive watch he wore, a detail I'd clocked at the party. I gave him Clara's routine, the days she claimed to stay late, the supposed out-of-town meetings. I handed him a photograph of them from the company website, standing a few feet apart, smiling professionally. It felt like handing over a piece of my own heart for dissection. Pierce listened in silence, his gaze unwavering. He made a few notes in a small, worn-out notebook. When I was finished, he simply nodded. I'll be in touch, he said. You'll have something in a few days. It will be discreet. I paid him his retainer in cash, as he'd requested. We shook hands, a brief, firm gesture that sealed the pact. As I walked out of the coffee shop and back into the harsh afternoon light, my mind felt cold, operating on autopilot. But deep inside, something was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. It was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know yet how much pain I was about to uncover. The next 3 days were a masterclass in deception, mostly my own. I maintained the facade of our life with a discipline that scared me. I made dinner. I asked Clara about her day. I listened as she talked about a possible promotion in her department, how Damien was going to recommend her for a new internal project. He really believes in my potential. Eli, she'd said, her eyes shining with an ambition that I now saw was aimed at a life that had no place for me. Each word she spoke was a new piece on the chessboard of my mind. I didn't react, didn't question. I just listened, stored it away, and felt the board slowly tilting toward an inevitable checkmate. She was so confident in her lies, so comfortable in our home, that it made my blood run cold. Was our entire life together this easy for her to fake? On the night of the 4th day, as I was brushing my teeth, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. We'll talk tomorrow. I have what you need to see. I barely slept. I had been expecting it, steeling myself for it. But the weight of impending confirmation was a physical presence in the room. It was one thing to suspect, to know in your gut. It was another entirely to be faced with the cold, hard evidence of your life's greatest betrayal. The next day, I left work early, giving a vague excuse about a dental appointment. I drove to the address Pierce had sent, a small, anonymous office suite in a part of the city I never frequented. He greeted me with the same serious expression as before, gesturing for me to sit at a small table. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He simply placed a tablet on the table between us and began to swipe through the images. The first was a photo of Clara entering Damien's residential building in the middle of a weekday afternoon. My Clara, in her work clothes, looking over her shoulder before slipping inside. The timestamp was from a day she told me she was in an all-day training session across town. Then another, of them leaving later that day, their faces relaxed, smiling. Another image, the two of them at a quiet, secluded restaurant miles outside the city, sharing a bottle of wine. It was taken during business hours on a Tuesday she had claimed was filled with back-to-back meetings. He switched to short video clips, the audio muted. There was Clara, sitting in the passenger seat of Damien's car, laughing as she played with her phone, looking as comfortable and carefree as she used to look with me. Then another, the one that finally broke through my wall of cold detachment. A clip of them standing outside his building. A hug that lasted too long. A kiss, not a peck on the cheek, but a deep, lingering kiss that spoke of familiarity and passion. I watched it all in absolute silence. My face remained a mask of stone, but inside, my blood was boiling. A hot, searing rage mixed with a profound, hollowing grief. It was like watching a movie about someone I once knew. The woman on that screen was not my wife. She was a stranger living a secret life, a cowardly reality built on lies while I was at home planning a future with her. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was a life, a whole other life. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady, but my voice was firm. Thank you. That's all I need. I paid him the remainder of his fee, again in cash. He nodded, his eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been sympathy. Take care of yourself, Mr. Vance. As I walked to my car, my phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Clara. Hey honey, going to be late tonight. Emergency meeting at the office. Don't wait up for me. Love you. I stared at the words, at the casual lie punctuated by a declaration of love. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost surreal. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel sadness. All I felt was a vast, cold emptiness. The love was gone, scoured out of me by the images on that tablet. All that was left was the need to act. The drive from Pierce's office was a blur. My mind, which had been a storm of emotion, was now eerily calm. The path forward was clear, laid out before me like a stark, unadorned road. There would be no screaming matches, no tearful confrontations, no desperate pleas for answers. That woman, the one who could text, "love you," while she was with another man, did not deserve the dignity of my rage. She deserved only consequences. The next morning, I walked into the HR department at my own company and submitted my resignation. The promotion I had worked so hard for, the one that was supposed to be the foundation of our future, was now just a remnant of a life that no longer existed. My manager was stunned, tried to convince me to reconsider. I simply said I was closing a chapter and needed to take care of my own life for a while. My first act of freedom was to remove the job that had tied me to a future built on a lie. That same day, I met with a divorce attorney Garrett had recommended. I sat in his sterile, wood-paneled office and laid out the facts with the same clinical detachment I had used with Pierce. I presented the file, the photos, the videos, the timestamps. The lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, reviewed the evidence, his expression grim. "This is airtight, Mr. Vance," he said. "What are your terms?" I had only one that was non-negotiable. "There is a ring," I said, my voice steady. "My grandmother's engagement ring. I gave it to her when I proposed. It's a family heirloom. It represents generations of loyalty. I want it back. It is at the top of the list." It wasn't about the monetary value. It was about honor. It was family heritage, and I refused to let it remain on the hand of someone who had so thoroughly desecrated its meaning. That evening, when Clara sent the inevitable text about an off-site training session, I knew exactly where she would be. The investigator's report had made her patterns painfully clear. There was no more doubt, only the cold, hard need to close this chapter with my own hands. I drove to Damien Croft's house. The neighborhood was quiet, affluent, the houses set back from the road behind manicured lawns. I parked across the street, the engine idling for a moment as I gathered myself. Then, I cut the engine, got out, and walked up the stone pathway to his front door. I rang the doorbell. Seconds later, the door swung open. Damien himself stood there, wearing shorts and a casual shirt, a half-empty bottle of wine in his hand. He looked relaxed, smug, a man completely at ease in his perfect life. His eyes widened slightly in surprise, but the arrogant smirk quickly returned. "Vance," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" I ignored his question, my gaze unwavering. "I'm here to speak with my wife." He raised an eyebrow, amused by my audacity. Before he could call for Clara or make another snide remark, I handed him a large manila envelope. "What's this?" he asked, his smirk faltering slightly. "The divorce papers," I said, my voice level and cold. "Along with the formal demand for the return of my grandmother's ring and my lawyer's terms. I suggest you advise her to comply." He opened his mouth, a mocking retort on his lips, but I cut him off, my voice sharp as glass. "Call Clara." She appeared seconds later, running a hand through her loose hair, a smile on her face that died the instant she saw me standing on her lover's doorstep. Her expression froze, the color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and hollowed out in the warm light of the hallway. I held out a second copy of the envelope to her. My hand didn't tremble. "It's all decided, Clara," I said softly, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "There are no more excuses. There is no conversation to be had." She took the envelope, her hand shaking so badly it seemed to weigh 100 pounds. In the background, Damien let out a short, nervous laugh, a pathetic attempt to regain control of the situation. I kept my eyes locked on hers. "You betrayed me," I said, my voice low but carrying through the sudden, suffocating silence. "But you betrayed more than that. You devalued an inheritance that came long before either of us. My grandmother's ring. I want it back." She stammered, tried to form words, but only a choked sob escaped. I didn't wait for more. I gave Damien one last, dismissive glance, and finished. "Stay out of my life." I turned and walked back toward my car. "Eli, wait." Her voice was broken, desperate. "Please, let me explain." I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away, leaving behind the house that symbolized the end of everything I had once believed in. For the first time in weeks, I took a deep, full breath. There was no joy in what I had done, but there was resolve. The cycle was closed. The beginning of my new life was sealed with documents, silence, and the one thing no one could take from me, my dignity. I returned to an empty house. The silence that greeted me was no longer tense. It was hollow. Clara was still out, which made what I had to do next easier. I went straight to the bedroom closet, pulled out 2 large suitcases, and began to pack. I moved with a detached efficiency, packing only what truly mattered: my clothes, my documents, a few cherished books, and the framed photograph of my grandmother that always sat on my nightstand. In the picture, she was young, smiling, and on her finger was the ring I had now demanded back. With each folded shirt, with each item placed carefully in the suitcase, it felt like I was methodically dismantling the life we had built. This house, once our shared sanctuary, now felt cold and foreign, haunted by the ghost of a love that was now dead. Before I left, I placed my house key on the living room table. Beside it, I left a short, simple note. "Clara, it's decided. This is no longer my home. Take care of your life, because I will be taking care of mine." I locked the door behind me for the last time, went down the stairs, and loaded the suitcases into my car. I drove away without a single glance in the rearview mirror. I drove to my cousin's place, a small apartment across town where I knew I could stay until I found my own place. I was a man adrift, but I was no longer drowning. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered. It was Lorraine, my now ex-mother-in-law. Her voice was shaky, filled with a sadness that I knew was genuine. She asked if I would come to dinner with the family. She said Clara was devastated and that they all needed to talk. My first instinct was to refuse, to sever all ties completely. But a part of me knew I owed Lorraine, a woman who had always treated me like a son, the respect of a final, clear goodbye. I needed to close every last door. That night, I was received with a strained politeness. Lorraine had prepared a meal of my favorite dishes, a futile attempt to recreate a sense of unity that was long gone. The air in the house was heavy with unspoken grief. Clara was there, her face puffy, her eyes red from crying. She looked smaller, diminished. She tried to speak, her voice trembling. She apologized, said she had lost herself, that she never imagined I would leave her so coldly, so definitively. She tried to frame her affair as a mistake, a symptom of her unhappiness at work. I listened in silence, without interrupting. When she finally fell silent, her last, desperate excuse hanging in the air, I looked at her, my expression devoid of the anger she probably expected. "This wasn't a stumble, Clara," I said calmly. "It was a conscious choice. A woman doesn't end up at another man's house by accident, night after night. You didn't trip and fall into his bed. You chose it, over and over again." Lorraine, her eyes welling with tears, tried to intervene. She spoke of how much she loved me, begged me to consider forgiveness, to think about starting over. That's when she did something that surprised me. She excused herself from the table and returned a moment later holding a small, black velvet box. "Clara gave this to me this afternoon," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "She was too ashamed to return it to you in person." She placed the box on the table in front of me. I opened it. Inside, nestled on the worn velvet, was my grandmother's ring. Its simple, elegant diamond seemed to catch the light, a tiny star in the dim room. I picked it up, its familiar weight solid and real in my hand. It felt like I was holding not just a piece of jewelry, but generations of loyalty and respect. I was holding honor. I slipped it into my pocket. "Thank you, Lorraine," I said, my voice sincere. I looked at Clara one last time. "You took from me something that can't be undone. But this," I said, patting my pocket, "this I would never allow to be lost." I stood up, thanked Lorraine for the dinner, and said goodbye. Before I could leave, she took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't carry hatred with you, Elias," she pleaded. "Hatred eats you from the inside." I met her gaze. "I carry no hatred," I replied honestly. "But I carry no love anymore, either." I left with the ring in my pocket and the profound certainty that this page of my life was finally, completely, turned. In the following days, I found a small, furnished apartment and tried to establish a new, solitary rhythm. The pain was still there, a dull, constant ache in my chest, but my dignity was intact. It was in that fragile state of rebuilding that Garrett showed up at my door. He didn't call first. He just appeared, holding 2 coffees and a stack of folders under his arm. He took one look at my sparse apartment and my tired face and got straight to the point. "I've seen men destroy themselves after things like this, Eli," he said, his voice firm but kind. "They get lost in anger or despair. You are not going to be one of them. You're not going to waste your life on regret." He set the folders down on my small kitchen table. "Turn this pain into strategy." I listened, intrigued. It was the first time someone had suggested a path forward that wasn't just about healing or moving on. "I did some digging after you called me for that referral," Garrett admitted. "I was worried. And I found something interesting." He opened a folder. Inside were printouts of business filings and financial projections. "Damian Croft," he said, tapping a name on the page. "He's launching a new venture with foreign investors. And look who's listed as a silent partner, set to get a significant share once the funding is secured." He slid another paper across the table. Clara's name was right there, in black and white. A new kind of energy stirred inside me. It wasn't the hot, messy fire of revenge. It was something colder, more focused. It was the desire for a reckoning, not through impulsive acts, but through intelligence, time, and patience. It was no longer just about moving on. It was about settling the score, about ensuring that their future, built on the ashes of my own, would never come to pass. In that moment, the seed of a plan began to grow. A plan that would hit Damian and Clara where it hurt most. Their ambition, their finances, their future. I no longer needed confrontations. I just needed to wait for the right moment to act. The following days turned into a silent, strategic war game. Garrett, with his network of contacts in the financial world, opened doors I didn't even know existed. We reviewed the information Pierce had gathered, now cross-referencing it with the business plans Garrett had uncovered. The picture became clear. Damian was inflating his company's projected earnings to impress an overseas investment fund, a fund that was known for moving quickly and not always doing its due diligence. Clara, leveraging her own network, was listed as a strategic consultant, a silent partner who was greasing the wheels in exchange for a substantial future payout. They had a timeline, a schedule for capital injections. Their entire structure was a house of cards, just like my marriage had been. All it needed was a small, well-placed push for it all to come crashing down. We didn't move directly. We entered from the side. Through an intermediary, we created a holding company, a shell corporation with an innocuous name, Northbridge Partners. We approached Damian's venture not as a primary investor, but as a secondary source of bridge capital, a smaller, supportive investment to help them through the initial stages. Our offer was clean, professional, and came with clear governance clauses and, most importantly, a right of preference to purchase additional shares if their primary cash flow tightened. Damian, blinded by his own arrogance and haste, signed the agreement without reading the fine print carefully enough. Clara, in short, celebratory messages to him that Pierce had intercepted before closing my case, celebrated their win. They thought they had won the game before the final whistle had even blown. They had no idea that their new, helpful partner was the man they had so carelessly destroyed. The first move was subtle. As per our contract, Northbridge Partners initiated a light, standard procedure audit. The numbers Damian had adjusted to impress the foreign investors immediately created a small but significant gap between his projections and reality. It was a red flag. The second move was to freeze a portion of our credit line, citing the unforeseen discrepancies found in the audit. We assured him it was temporary, just until the issues were resolved, but the effect was immediate. Spreadsheets started to lag. Suppliers, sensing instability, began demanding payment guarantees. The original overseas investor, spooked by the slightest hint of trouble, pulled back slightly, delaying their next major capital injection. That was all it took. With their cash flow choked, Northbridge Partners exercised its contractual right of preference, buying up a controlling stake in the company for a fraction of its projected worth. Within a matter of weeks, I, Elias Vance, operating from behind the scenes, had gone from a heartbroken observer to the silent, majority controller of their entire future. The transition meeting was set for a Tuesday morning. The document that sealed their fate was only 2 pages long, but it contained one decisive paragraph. The newly formed board could change executive leadership, effective immediately. I had Garrett stand in as Northbridge's lawyer. I even hired Pierce for the day, to sit in the front row as a security consultant, a quiet, intimidating presence. When Damian Croft walked into the boardroom, his confident smile cracked at the sight of unfamiliar faces at the table. He was expecting a simple procedural meeting. He was not expecting a coup. Samantha arrived a few minutes later, holding a notebook she would never get the chance to use. "I entered last," Un announced. I took the empty seat at the head of the table, calmly opened my folder, and placed the new board's appointment minutes on the polished wood. Damian shifted in his seat, a flicker of panic in his eyes. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to maintain a shred of his usual arrogance. Who represents Northbridge Partners? I met his gaze across the table, my expression neutral. I do. Silence. A thick, complete silence that sucked all the air out of the room. I saw Clara put a hand to her chest, as if she couldn't breathe. The color drained from her face, just as it had on Damien's doorstep. The man she had gambled her life on, the future she had betrayed me for, was now at my mercy. I didn't give a triumphant speech. I didn't mention our past. I never brought my marriage into that room. I spoke only of numbers, deadlines, and professional conduct. In a calm, measured voice, I announced Damien Croft's immediate removal from his executive role. I announced the suspension of Clara's strategic consulting contract, pending a full review of all agreements signed in the last 2 months. I handed them their written notices and stated the deadline by which they were to vacate the premises. No shouting, no humiliation, just consequences, cold, clean, and absolute. Outside the building, Clara waited for me. She asked for 5 minutes. I granted it. She cried, said she had made a terrible mistake, that she had been swept away by Damien's promises of a prominent career. She said she still loved me. I listened until she was finished. Then I replied, my voice calm. Love and loyalty walk together. Clara. When one leaves the room, the other loses its way. That was the end of our conversation. Garrett put a hand on my shoulder, and we walked away, leaving the gleaming glass building and the wreckage of 2 lives behind us. The following weeks were quiet. I organized my new home. I started running again in the late afternoons. I began sleeping through the night. At the company I now controlled, I established a clean routine, firing those who were complicit in Damien's schemes and hiring people who wanted to build something real. One evening, a brown envelope with no return address arrived. Inside was a 6-page letter, in Clara's familiar handwriting. She wrote that Damien had already abandoned her, looking for a new partner to rebuild his project. She wrote about her regrets, recalling old memories, trying to rebuild a bridge with ink and paper. She asked if I still thought of her. I read it slowly, giving the words the respect a past that was once real deserved. Then, I took the letter to my metal kitchen sink. I lit a match. I watched as the paper curled, turned black, and dissolved into smoke and ash. Some things, once burned, stop hurting. I opened the window to let the fresh air in. Then I picked up the phone and called Lorraine. Not to talk about Clara, but to thank her for the gesture with the ring, and to ask if she needed anything. Her surprised, warm voice on the other end of the line was a reminder that goodness still existed. Later that night, I opened the small velvet box and held my grandmother's ring. I taped the old wedding photo to the back of a new, empty notebook, not out of nostalgia, but as a record. There was love, there was failure, there was a choice. I closed the notebook. I had lost what I loved, but I had kept what held me up. My world outside kept moving. But for the first time in a long time, mine finally had direction. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.